So, Peter, you may have had your reservations about intervening in Syria, about Iraq first time round, but surely this is a fairly clear-cut humanitarian case. There are people being crucified, there are people starving up a mountain, we've got the mechanism to help them. Do we not also have the moral obligation to help them?
Well, first of all, do we have the mechanism to help them, and if so, what is it? Secondly, what form would help take? You might be able to get them out of danger. Possibly, I'm not sure whether we even have the forces that can do that. But we must remember that a year ago we were seriously considering intervening on the side of the people who now call themselves ISIS. It doesn't suggest that we have any very clear idea of what we're doing in the area or that we have any control over the long-term consequences. So I think we would have to be very careful about what we said we were doing. No one's going to oppose sending succor to the Yazidis or indeed the Iraqi or Syrian Christians who are menaced by these people, and indeed trying to get them away from their persecutors. But beyond that, I think we have to be extremely careful what we consider doing, and also we have to be extremely modest about what we think we can do.
Douglas, what do you think we can do, and what do you think we should do?
Well, I mean, I think there's certainly no doubt that there is a lack of strategic thinking from this country and others about exactly what it is we expect or might hope to see or might be able to help create in the region. However, that being said, and that lack of initiative undoubtedly being there is this question of what in the immediate term one might be able to do. And I think that the ability to, at the very least, send humanitarian assistance to the Yazidis and others.
We're doing that already.
In Iraq, we're doing already. And if necessary, to help push back ISIS from their doorstep. Now that's a problematic one, because we might get back into that position of a kind of whack-a-mole. There are things that are worse than whack-a-mole, of course, such as ISIS effectively sort of winning. But I think there should be some clear idea of what pushing them back means, where pushing them back to is the aim. None of that is clear at the moment, but I think that there is a just cause and a just desire to try to stop ISIS getting any further.
Mm-hmm. Peter, you will agree, I'm sure, that ISIS do pose an appalling threat to the region. They are not in the business simply of occupying territory, but of killing women, children. There are talk of people being buried alive. Now, isn't this the very example of what the United Nations calls a responsibility to protect? I mean, if we see a massacre about to happen, there is surely an obligation to the West to stop it. I mean, we ask what we could do, but we can go and take, for example, we can take them down from we can do repeated sorties, help take them down from the mountain where they're about to die into safety. These are things which don't involve our being entangled there for a long time.
Well, that's reasonable in itself if that's all you do, and if this isn't being used as a pretext for a re-engagement in Iraq, from which some Americans particularly feel they were wrongly expelled by the Iraqi government and they would like a pretext to get back, then are we going to get involved in defending Kurdistan and actually becoming, in effect, the army of Kurdistan, a country which we've created but won't acknowledge we have created and therefore will not arm with the sort of modern weapons we gave to Iraq, because we still pretend that we can maintain the unity of Iraq in face of the fact that it's really three countries, Kurdistan, the Shia Iraq and the Sunni Iraq. There are all incredibly complicated things going on here.
Isn't it a great thing that we created
one step very rapidly leads to another, and the danger is that what is being offered is not an intervention with a specific limited purpose, but an intervention which is open-ended and which will go on for a very long time and will have huge unintended consequences, as previous interventions have. Also, we have to be sure that the information we're getting about what's going on is correct, and we have to understand what ISIS is. And ISIS is fundamentally an outgrowth of the war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which is now really the dominant problem in the Middle East, which we have contributed to.
But you mentioned that we created Kurdistan. I mean, we did that through Operation Desert Fox in the aftermath of the First Gulf War, with the British enforced no-fly zone, which created an area of incredible peace and prosperity.
It had to be backed up with troops on the ground.
Sure, but I would point to Kurdistan as an example of where British intervention can actually help and lead to prosperity. It's got quite a long track record.
Well, up to a point, but are we actually prepared to become the army of Kurdistan? which is showing itself perhaps unequal to the task of defending itself against ISIS. Is that what we're going to do? And how far do we get involved in that? If we actually do create a Kurdistan and break up Iraq, something which we claim is the kind of thing we don't do, we're changing the whole political and economic geography of the Middle East. Is this what we're getting involved in? And if so, do we really imagine it'll be over by the fall of the leaves?
I'm not sure it's going to be the case that this country had it in its power, even if we wished to, as it were, break up Iraq or create a Kurdistan.
No, I agree with that, but I think anything that we would contemplate of necessity, since this government has pretty much dismantled our armed forces, would be piggybacking on American power anyway, and would be for political cover purposes rather than because we were actually necessary to the operation. And then it's a question of whether we wish to give political cover to and be stuck bodily inside such an operation.
I mean, there is, if I can say, there is a striking thing about the Kurdistan example at the moment, which is that the argument for them staying in Iraq since 2003 was that they had a 10-year head start on the rest of the country. They had liberalised, modernised, democratised to an extent, and so on, and they would be effectively a good influence in the new Iraq. I do think that argument has taken a huge blow in recent months, apart from anything else. It is very hard, if the Kurds decide to really make a move for a breakaway, it's very hard to argue against it now, since it's clear that the rest of the country's security interests are not their security interests.
Which is complicated for us in our argument with Russia at the moment. If we start saying that breakaways are okay, then the argument about Kosovo is complicated, but if we then allow for a breakaway in Kurdistan, then we are altering the borders of the world in a way which we say we're against. But the other point here is that if we break up Iraq, then we have admitted the complete failure of our previous mission. To admit also that ISIS, or whatever it's called this week, is a major threat, is to cast enormous doubt on ISIS. So it is not merely a year ago when we were talking about air attacks on Syria, but before that when we were taking part in the destabilization of Syria, whose government is now one of the principal bulwarks against ISIS. We have made the most tremendous mess of this. All that people like me are saying is that we should acknowledge that we have got it repeatedly wrong in the past. We should be very careful about what we commit ourselves to in the future.
I do agree with that, with one caveat, which is that the disaster of Syria is not our fault.
Yes, it is. It's completely our fault.
It is the fault of the actors involved, in particular the actors in the region that have decided to use Syria as their proxy battleground. We, the West, Britain in particular, are really no player at all in Syria and never really have been over the years of the civil war. The main players in Syria are Iran and Saudi.
Well, no, there was a very strong impression given by the United States and France and Britain that we were on the side of a rebellion against Bashar Assad. And it was that impression which I think led to a lot of the advances made by the rebels in the earlier period, before the question of arming them and of joining in on their side had arisen. So I think we should be careful to recognise that we did play some part in that.
So your position, Peter, effectively is that, as we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan, these things always go wrong. So we shouldn't even try humanitarian mission.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I would never be against humanitarian missions, provided that that's what they are and provided they're effective. It would be crazy to be against humanitarian missions, but to be very, very careful to be sure that that is all that we are doing.